Imagine you are standing on a beach in 413 BC. The sun is setting over the harbor at Syracuse, Sicily. The water around you is turning red, not from the sun, from blood. Thousands of Athenian soldiers, the finest warriors of the greatest democracy the world had ever seen, are drowning, dying, or surrendering in the shallows around you. Their ships, over 200 of them, are burning or sinking. And the worst part? This was entirely, completely, devastatingly avoidable. This is the story of the Sicilian Expedition. A disaster so total, so absolute, that historians have argued for 2,500 years about how it actually happened. A story involving a one-eyed general, a religious scandal, a traitor who switched sides twice, and a solar eclipse that may have decided the fate of Western civilization. Stay with me, because this story gets stranger before it gets clearer. To understand why Athens sent its entire navy to the other side of the known world, you need to understand what Athens was in 415 BC. This was the Golden Age. The Parthenon had just been completed. Socrates was walking the streets asking uncomfortable questions. The Athenian Empire stretched across the Aegean Sea. Athens controlled hundreds of tributary cities. Its navy was unmatched, its democracy was the envy of the Greek world, and its citizens genuinely believed, with some justification, that they were the greatest civilization on earth. But there was a problem. Athens had been at war with Sparta for 16 years. The Peloponnesian War was grinding both sides into exhaustion. And someone had a big idea. His name was Alcibiades, and he was the most dangerous kind of man, brilliant, charismatic, ambitious, and completely without scruple. He stood before the Athenian assembly and made an argument that sounded almost reasonable. Sicily, he said, was rich. Enormously rich. If Athens could control Sicily, it could cut off Sparta's grain supply, flood its own treasury, and end the war in a single stroke. The crowd roared. The vote was nearly unanimous. And just like that, Athens committed itself to the largest naval expedition in its history. Now here is where it starts to get strange. Just days before the fleet was scheduled to depart, one of the most bizarre events in ancient history occurred. The Athenians woke up to find that overnight, someone had vandalized nearly every sacred stone statue in the city. These weren't just decorations. The Hermes stone pillars topped with the head of the god Hermes and carved with explicit imagery were considered sacred guardians of homes, businesses, and crossroads. They were protective symbols. And someone had smashed the faces off almost all of them. In a single night. Across the entire city. Athens went into a panic. This was not just vandalism. This was a religious atrocity. An omen. A desecration on the eve of the greatest military expedition in Athenian history. Who had done it? Fingers immediately pointed at Alcibiades. His enemies claimed he and his drunken friends had done it as a prank. Alcibiades demanded an immediate trial to clear his name. The assembly refused, they needed him to lead the fleet. So they sent him anyway, with the charges hanging over his head like a sword. It was the first sign that this expedition was cursed from the start. The fleet that left Athens in the summer of 415 BC was genuinely awe-inspiring. 134 warships called triremes. Dozens of supply vessels. Nearly 40,000 men, soldiers, sailors, oarsmen, servants. Thucydides, the historian who recorded all of this and who may have witnessed some of it himself, called it the most expensive and splendid expedition that any single Greek city had ever mounted. The Athenians were so proud that when the fleet gathered in the harbor, the entire city came down to watch. It was a spectacle. A celebration. People wept with pride. Generals poured libations from golden cups into the sea. Trumpets sounded. And then 200 ships rode out of the harbor of Piraeus, and the crowd watched until they disappeared over the horizon. Nobody watching that departure could have imagined that most of those men would never come home. That the ships they were cheering would end up at the bottom of a Sicilian harbor. That the expedition they were celebrating would crack Athens so deeply it would never fully recover. The expedition barely reached Sicily before its first catastrophe struck, not from the enemy, but from home. A ship arrived from Athens with urgent orders. Alcibiades was to return immediately to stand trial for the mutilation of the Hermae and for allegedly mocking the sacred Eleusinian mysteries during a drunken dinner party. This was a death sentence waiting to happen. Alcibiades knew it. So instead of sailing back to Athens to face his accusers, he did something breathtaking. He defected. He sailed his ship to Sparta, the enemy, and offered to help them destroy the very expedition he had designed. The man who had convinced Athens to send its fleet to Sicily now sat in the Spartan court and told the Spartans exactly how to defeat it. He advised them to send a general to Syracuse, the main Sicilian city. He told them to build a permanent fortification in Attica right outside Athens itself that would strangle Athenian agriculture. Every secret he knew about Athenian strategy, he handed to the enemy. And Sparta listened. The expedition had lost its architect and gained its worst enemy. Back in Sicily, the remaining Athenian commanders, Nicias and Lamachus, were already struggling. Nicias had actually voted against the expedition from the beginning. He thought it was insane. He had argued in the assembly that Sicily was too far, too large, too unknown. He had even tried to scare the Athenians off by wildly exaggerating how many ships and men the mission would require, hoping the cost would deter them. Instead, the assembly had just said, "Great, we'll send all of that." Nicias was now commanding an expedition he had tried to stop, in a land he had argued was unconquerable, with a third of his leadership defecting to the enemy. But for a while, for a tantalizing, brief while, it almost worked. The Athenians landed, won early skirmishes, and began building siege walls around Syracuse. They were close. Dangerously close to actually pulling this off. And then the Spartan general Gylippus arrived. And everything changed. Gylippus was exactly the kind of commander the Athenians didn't want to face. Where Nicias was cautious and indecisive, Gylippus was fast, aggressive, and smart. He arrived in Sicily with only a small force, but he immediately transformed the Syracusan resistance. He organized their army, rebuilt their morale, and made the single move that doomed the Athenian siege: he built a counterwall. The Athenians were trying to encircle Syracuse with a continuous wall that would cut off its supply lines. Gylippus built a wall across the Athenian wall's planned route, blocking its completion. The siege couldn't be closed. And now it was the Athenians who were increasingly trapped, sitting in a foreign land, far from home, with dwindling supplies, rising disease, and a city that refused to fall. General Lamachus, the most aggressive of the three Athenian commanders, was killed in a skirmish. Nicias, already sick with kidney disease, ancient sources describe his symptoms in uncomfortable detail, was now solely in command. And he made the decision that would destroy everything. He wrote home asking for help. And Athens, instead of cutting its losses, sent more men. What Athens sent was a second fleet. 73 more ships. 5,000 more soldiers. Under a general named Demosthenes, a brilliant commander who had won famous victories in Greece. When his fleet appeared on the horizon at Syracuse, the Athenians in Sicily reportedly wept with relief. The Syracusans were terrified. And for one brief, dramatic moment, the whole equation shifted again. Demosthenes immediately grasped the situation. The siege walls couldn't be completed in daylight, Gylippus would stop them. So Demosthenes planned a night attack on the Syracusan heights. A massive, sweeping assault under the moon. 10,000 men climbing rocky terrain in darkness to seize the high ground and turn the whole war around. It almost worked. The Athenians achieved total surprise. They charged up the slope, routed the first defenders, and for a few chaotic minutes, victory seemed possible. And then everything collapsed in the dark. Units got separated. The password was passed to the wrong soldiers. Athenians started fighting each other in the confusion. Syracusan reinforcements rallied. The retreat became a rout. Men fell off cliffs in the darkness. 2,000 Athenians died in a single night on a hillside they couldn't even see properly. The last real chance was gone. After the disaster on the heights, Demosthenes made the only rational recommendation left: leave. Immediately. Get everyone on the ships and go home. The mission had failed. Better to lose the expedition than lose the men. Nicias, agonizingly, agreed. The order was given. The ships were loaded. The fleet prepared to sail by night. And then, and this is the moment historians have argued about for centuries, the moon went dark. On August 27, 413 BC, a total lunar eclipse turned the moon blood red and then black over the harbor of Syracuse. To modern eyes, this is astronomy. To an Athenian soldier in 413 BC, this was the gods speaking. Nicias consulted the soothsayers. They told him the army must wait 3 times 9 days, 27 days, before departing. Nicias obeyed. 27 days. The fleet sat in the harbor. The Syracusans used those 27 days to prepare. They blocked the harbor entrance with a chain of ships. They rearranged their navy. They planned exactly how they would destroy the Athenian fleet when it finally tried to escape. An astronomical event had given the enemy a month to prepare the killing blow. And the Athenians just sat there and waited. What happened next in the harbor of Syracuse is one of the most documented naval disasters in ancient history. The Athenians finally panicked and tried to break out by force. They sent every ship they had at the Syracusan blockade. The battle in the harbor was savage and confined, nothing like the open-water naval warfare Athenian triremes were designed for. The Syracusans had modified their ships specifically for this fight, adding reinforced prows for ramming rather than speed. In the chaos and blood of the harbor battle, the Athenian fleet was broken. Ships were rammed, boarded, burned. Men drowned in their armor. Those who made it to shore found Syracusan soldiers waiting for them. Nicias and Demosthenes tried to lead the survivors overland to find allied territory. 40,000 men began a march across Sicily. Disease-ridden, starving, hunted, drinking from rivers that Syracusan soldiers had already poisoned with corpses. They were cut down in ambushes, captured in thousands, and finally forced to surrender at the Asinaris River, where men threw themselves into the water to drink and were slaughtered ankle-deep in their own blood. Thucydides called it the greatest defeat in Greek history. He wasn't exaggerating. Nicias and Demosthenes were both executed. The surviving Athenian prisoners, somewhere between 7,000 and 10,000 men, were marched to the stone quarries outside Syracuse, where they were confined in pits open to the burning Sicilian sun. Thucydides describes their conditions with quiet horror: no shelter, brutal heat and cold, starvation rations, disease spreading through the crowded cuts in the rock. Many died there. Some were sold into slavery. A lucky few who could recite passages from Euripides, whose plays the Sicilians apparently loved, were occasionally given food or even their freedom. Of the 40,000 men who had left Athens with such fanfare, the vast majority never came home. The ships were gone. The treasury was devastated. The greatest military expedition in Athenian history had been annihilated. What happened to Athens after this is equally haunting. The city didn't collapse immediately, which in some ways made things worse. Athens struggled on for another 9 years, rebuilding its fleet, fighting Sparta, losing allies, desperately seeking Persian support. But the Sicilian disaster had cracked something fundamental. The democratic confidence that had made Athens great, the belief that collective daring could overcome any obstacle, was now shadowed by the memory of collective catastrophe caused by that exact same daring. Within a year of the disaster, an oligarchic coup nearly overthrew the democracy. Alcibiades, the man who had started it all, actually returned to Athens eventually, was briefly hailed as a savior, then exiled again. He was later assassinated in Persia, alone, wrapped in his cloak, cut down by enemies who had surrounded his house in the night. Nicias, the man who had tried to stop the expedition, was dead in a Sicilian quarry. Demosthenes, who had tried to save it, was dead on a Sicilian hillside. The architect, the reluctant commander, the rescuer, all gone. Athens finally fell to Sparta in 404 BC. The Golden Age was over. So who or what actually killed the Sicilian expedition? Historians have been arguing about this for 2,400 years, and the answers they've landed on are deeply uncomfortable, because they don't point to any single villain. They point at everyone. You can blame Alcibiades, his reckless ambition launched the mission and his betrayal helped sink it. You can blame Nicias, his caution, his illness, his superstition, his disastrous decision to stay for the eclipse. You can blame the Athenian assembly, the democratic mob that voted for a war it didn't understand, against an enemy it had never seen, in a place it had never been. You can blame the structure of Athenian democracy itself, which gave ultimate power to crowds susceptible to charismatic speakers and intoxicating ideas. Thucydides, who was himself an exiled Athenian general when he wrote his account, seems to suggest all of these simultaneously. His history of the expedition reads less like a military account and more like a tragedy in the classical Greek sense, a great civilization brought low by the very qualities that made it great. Its ambition. Its confidence. Its inability to stop. There is a detail in Thucydides that I keep coming back to. He describes the departure of the fleet from Athens, that glorious, tearful, trumpet-filled morning, and he notes that many of the soldiers, when they looked out at the vast sea they were crossing to reach a land most of them had never seen, felt a sudden chill. A doubt. A sense of how far from home they were going. But then the trumpets sounded again, and the oars hit the water, and the fleet moved forward, and the feeling passed. That moment, that flicker of doubt suppressed by momentum and pride and the sound of trumpets, feels like it contains the entire story. The Sicilian expedition wasn't destroyed by Syracuse. It was destroyed by Athens's inability to hear its own doubts. And that, perhaps, is the most modern thing about this 2,400-year-old disaster. Because every civilization, every institution, every person has moments where the trumpets are playing and the crowd is cheering and something quiet inside them says, wait. Are we sure about this? The question history keeps asking us is, do we stop and listen? Or do we let the oars hit the water and sail on? The Sicilian expedition ended in 413 BC on a river in Sicily, in blood and surrender. But its echoes have never really stopped. Thucydides wrote his account precisely because he believed, and I think he was right, that human nature doesn't change. That the same dynamics of ambition, groupthink, charismatic leaders, democratic excess, and suppressed doubt that destroyed Athens's fleet would destroy other things in other ages. Military historians have compared the Sicilian expedition to Napoleon's invasion of Russia, to the First World War's Gallipoli campaign, to countless other moments when confident powers sent confident forces into catastrophic overextension. The specifics change. The shape of the tragedy stays the same. If you want to read Thucydides' own account, his history of the Peloponnesian War is still in print, still readable, and still one of the most bracingly honest things ever written about how wars begin, how they end, and how badly the humans running them tend to misunderstand both. And if you found this story as haunting as I do, consider subscribing, there are more of these waiting. History is full of moments where everything was going fine until it wasn't. And understanding them, I think, is one of the most important things we can do. Thanks for watching.